Welcome everyone to our annual Women in Science event in celebration of the 2024 International Day of Women and Girls in Science. I'm Michelle Hackett from the CSIRO Staff Association, and this year we are lucky enough to have Dr. Jess Melbourne-Thomas as our guest speaker, who we will introduce shortly. But firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're meeting today. I'm in Perth, so that's Whadjuk Noongar country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So welcome, or kaya everyone. Today's event is proudly brought to you by CSIRO Staff Association members. The CSIRO Staff Association is a section of the Community and Public Sector Union, and its cause is to protect and progress the interests of our members in CSIRO and society. After the last event, last year, I had many staff asking me for more information about the Staff Association and how to get involved. So we'll put a link to our website in the chat shortly. And for those without chat, the website is sirostaff.org.au. All right, we have some wonderful Staff Association members helping to run today's event. So some behind the scenes, and we have if she managed to hop on, we'll check in a tick. Nuwan Vithnaraj from Werribee and Andrea Powell from Kensington being our on-camera team today. So thank you, ladies. So I'll shortly pass over to Nuwan if she managed to work the technology to introduce Jess, and then Andrea for the conversation. We'll have time at the end of today's event for questions. So be ready to pop your questions in the chat or use the raise hand button when we get to the Q&A. So we're hosting this event via webinar, which means that your videos and your mic won't work unless you click the raise hand button, and then myself or one of my colleagues will know to give you access to the unmute and you'll be able to put your video on. And of course, just a quick note that we are recording today's event. Okay. So enough from me. We get into the main event. I will just check if we have Nuwan's managed to log on, and she will introduce Jess for us. Just give me one tick to check. Otherwise, I will do the honours myself.
Nuwan is here. I've just enabled your microphone.
Yes,
Nuwan.
thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let me, I think I cannot switch on my video, but I will camera, but I'll do that.
I've just clicked allow camera too.
Oh, good. Yeah. All right. Sorry for being late. Thanks for having me for the So let's welcome Dr. Jess Melbourne, and who is an international research scientist, mother, and a former Rhodes Scholar. Jess grew up exploring Tasmania's spectacular coastline and wildness and has gone on and worked in the marine environment from the tropics to poles with a background in mathematical modeling and Antarctic climate change science. Jess is now a knowledge broker for CSIRO, helping to bridge the gap between complex scientific research and decision-making for sustainability. A passionate advocate for diversity and gender equality in science, Jess co-founded the Homeward Bound project, which took the largest ever all-female expedition on a leadership journey to Antarctica in 2016. Jess was one of Austria's first 30 superstar of STEM, was named Tasmania's Young Tall Poppy of the Year in 2015, and was Tasmanian Australian of the Year in 2020. She was also one of 12 female scientists globally to have her portrait featured as a constellation on the ceiling of New York's Grand Central Station as part of G's Balance the Equation campaign. Let's welcome Jess. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuwan. Wonderful. I'm going to pass this over to Andrea now, and she's going to barrage Jess with questions. Just joking. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Jess.
Hi, Jess, and hi, everyone online. I thought we'd start at the beginning and ask how your science career got started. What first got you interested in science, and how did that progress into a career in science?
Thanks, Andrea. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm feeling a bit nervous looking at the numbers, but really delighted to have an opportunity to speak to you and with Andrea today. So I grew up in Lutruwita, Tasmania. I work in Nipaluna, Hobart, and I acknowledge the Muwinina people as the original custodians of the land and sea country where we work. And so I guess I just always had this really close connection to nature growing up here, and a really strong interest in the natural world. I thought I might even share a few photos actually, and we tested the technology. So let's see how we go. How does that look, Andrea?
Looks great.
So I included this photo, and I'll show you a couple more because they're photos that my dad took before I was born. He was one of the kind of early pioneers of underwater photography in Tasmania, and my brother and I grew up with big printouts of these photos on our bedroom wall. He's a marine scientist too, actually. And, you know, I think just being surrounded by these kinds of images and having the opportunity to be in nature so much just kind of meant that I was a little bit destined for a career in science and in biology and ecology. And so, yeah, I guess it was there from the start. I also included this image. It's I fished it out of my older daughter's school bag. She's 8 now, but I think she was about 6 when she wrote this, and it was kind of crumpled up at the bottom of the bag underneath a squash banana. It says, "The waves crash, the fish swim to the seaweed. I love the sea. It's like the sea is calling me." And I've used this quite a bit because it just, you know, captures so perfectly the way I feel about the ocean and about marine science. And actually my elder daughter was born on the inaugural International Day for Women and Girls in Science. So it seemed kind of fitting also to acknowledge that hopefully there's this kind of cross-generational interest in science and in the marine environment. I'll stop sharing, but we might come back to some more pictures.
And so those pictures are extraordinary. I can't imagine getting to have those on my bedroom wall, let alone having a parent who had taken them. And it's wonderful to hear that that the love of the ocean is continuing on to the next generation. How did that progress into a career in science for you?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to study at the University of Tasmania, which had at the time and still has a really strong program in marine science that includes a large proportion of kind of working in the field, which was really attractive to me. And from there, I went to the University of Oxford, where, of all places, I got interested in the science of tropical coral reefs. So Oxford then bounced me to Indonesia first. And then I also worked in the Philippines and in Mexico on tropical coral reefs. And then I went to the opposite end of things, which was working in polar environments. So I spent about 10 years working in Antarctic marine science before I came to SARO. So it's been a bit of a journey all over the place, but an exciting one.
So can you tell us a bit more about that adventure in Antarctica? I think that a lot of us would like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I feel so lucky to have had that opportunity. I went on a 2.5-month research cruise. At that time it was on the Aurora Australis to East Antarctica, and we spent that whole time in the Antarctic sea ice. So it was in spring, which is when there's still quite a lot of ice, but it's just starting to break up. And we were basically studying the importance of that environment in relation to climate and also ecology. You know, of course, it was stunningly beautiful. I've got some photos of that too. So let's go back to so my screen sharing. So here, this is me on the ice. My role was to sample ice cores, and then we melted them down and we looked at the algae that was growing in the ice and tried to understand, you know, where it was growing at the top or the bottom and what kind of features of the ice influenced the productivity that was then available to other things like krill to eat. It was full of adventures too. We got stuck in the ice, which happens. And I think, oh no, I've got a photo of the curious wildlife. This is quite a common occurrence, the curious penguins taking part in our science. So we were stuck in the ice. We were there for a week or so waiting for a crack to open up, and one day we were out on the ice, and this minke whale was popping through a lead and blowing and breathing and just kind of hanging about, which was absolutely amazing. And I was so captivated and taking photos that I didn't notice that I was right next to a patch of thin ice where we'd drilled a hole the day before, and I slipped right through into the freezing cold water. So that was an experience too. It does mean that my claim to fame is that I've swum with a minke whale in Antarctica. We also ran out of coffee because we were stuck, which was a bit of a disaster actually, for both the scientists and the crew, but you know, you do it tough. But yes, I feel very fortunate to have been able to have that experience.
That's not the hardship I expected to hear. I think for an Antarctic cruise was sure, stuck in the sea ice, fell in, but then we ran out of coffee. So what area of science are you involved in at the moment?
So my current title, which I tend not to use a whole lot because it kind of makes people have a puzzled expression on their face, but I work as a transdisciplinary researcher and knowledge broker. And it was actually that experience working in Antarctic marine science that I think kind of triggered my interest in pivoting a bit from what had been a role that was in climate change science and mathematical modelling to working more at the kind of engagement with people end of things. So when I was working for the Australian Antarctic Division, I had the opportunity to work kind of, I guess, right at the science policy interface, particularly in terms of the work that we were doing at the time to propose and try to implement large-scale marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean. And yeah, that experience, I think, really emphasised to me how important that translation of science into policy is, and that kind of led me to where I am now.
And so is that translation element, is that what you're referring to when you describe yourself as a knowledge broker?
Yeah, and it's a funny title actually, because I don't think it fully captures what I've experienced the role to be actually, which is partly about translating science to end users in ways that, you know, is most meaningful for them. But it's a two-way thing. So as I find, as much of my role is about bringing in or bringing together different types of knowledge into the research process. And there's various terms that we use to describe that, talk about knowledge co-production or transdisciplinary research. But it's really collaboration that acknowledges that whether it's communities or industry or government, traditional Indigenous knowledge holders, you know, there are these other really important sources of knowledge that when we kind of weave them together in research can deliver outputs that are much more useful to the people that need them. So yeah, I think that's how I'd describe that knowledge broker role.
Great. So to kind of broaden our questions a little bit to our theme of the day, one question that often comes up at our International Women's Day and men's health events is how to achieve that elusive work-life balance. Has that been a balancing act for you too? And do you have any tips for the rest of us?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question, Andrea, because, you know, honestly, I don't think it should have to be a balancing act. And I think there are ways that, you know, we can change the way we work. And a lot of these are already happening, actually, which is great. And so it means that, the workplace is much more accommodating of these other roles that we play and more supportive of mental health. One of the things I found earlier on in my career as a mum in science was that there was definitely still a bit of a stigma around kind of isolating parental roles from work. I remember when I was filling out the paperwork for the first maternity leave I took, and the wording was something like, you know, I would be absenting myself from the workplace for my period of isolation. You know, this is 2016, and I'm sure it's been updated since then. But I do, I do try really hard to be as visible as possible as a mum and as a scientist. I put in a couple of pictures actually because my poor kids get dragged around to all kinds of things. Here they are. So that on the right, that's my younger daughter, 4 months old, opening her first international conference, and then this was recently accepting an award where both girls were really, you know, they wanted to come and be part of it. And I think kind of that's the point that I wanted to make, that that I think families get a lot out of being included, and certainly I see that my girls they learn a lot and they ask a lot of questions, and I think it's really important for younger people too who are interested in science careers to see that it's possible, you know, to wear these multiple hats at once. I'll just mention another thing I think is an opportunity, is around being kind of more inclusive and allowing this better balance. During COVID, we learned a lot about ways to work online, and that was great because it was much more inclusive of people who either couldn't travel because of family responsibilities or, you know, were choosing not to travel for other reasons. And I would like to see more of that kind of active decision making about when to travel and consideration of what the costs are to other things in your life of always having to travel for work. And then, you know, we learnt how to use the technology. We're using it now, and I think it would be a shame if we just kind of went back to the other way of working. Oh, and I should also say that I'm incredibly fortunate to have an incredible husband who is not only an amazing dad, but who, you know, shares the parenting load brilliantly. So, and he encourages me to switch off from work. So I think personally, at least, that's a really important element of this balance, as you put it. That was a long answer, Andrea. Sorry, I got
No, that's
I got
okay.
on a bit of a roll.
There's a lot of wisdom there, and I don't know if you got to see the reacts, but an awful lot of support for those ideas of being able to involve your family in your work, and not have to keep them completely separate, to recognise that you are a whole person, and being that involves relationships with other people. So you've also been involved in promoting women and girls in STEM yourself in the recent past. Could you tell us a bit about that, and what your thoughts are about how we can better support and promote women and girls in STEM, both now and in the future?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I've been really fortunate to work with some amazing people in developing initiatives to help elevate the voices of women in STEM, and also in action around climate change. So the Homeward Bound program was an example of that. I was involved in co-founding that program, but it's gone on to, so the first voyage was in 2016. I think there's been 8 cohorts of women since then. And one thing about Homeward Bound that's been incredibly powerful is this global network it's built of women in science who are connected to each other and can share their stories and support each other and kind of advocate for change. So I think that's really powerful. I also think that, you know, diversity more generally is so fundamental in science, particularly given the complex and urgent nature of these problems like climate change that we're all addressing. We just fundamentally need mixes of different ways of thinking and worldviews to be able to find innovative solutions to work around those problems. So I think there's kind of a bigger picture need that is even in addition to, you know, the fundamental principles of equity and inclusion. I do think there's probably, well, I know there's more to do in terms of promoting and enabling diversity in the more general sense, and particularly intersectionality. So people that, you know, kind of are at the boundaries, I guess, of different minority groups. And, you know, I think we need to think really carefully about inclusion and supporting intersectionality in sorrow and more generally. But yeah, it's been great to see lots of really fantastic things happening in recent years. So I feel really encouraged about, you know, a positive future.
Thanks, Jess. That's all the prepared questions we have from me. So I'm now going to hand over back to Michelle.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. And I've been very lucky to have a couple of conversations with Jess myself recently. So I've got a couple here before we go to Q&A that I'm going to very cheekily ask myself. Jess, just before we move on to the Q&A, can you tell us a bit more about the work you're doing at the moment, and for example, with World Heritage, if you don't mind going into that with a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure, Michelle. And I realised after I'd answered that question that I hadn't really provided any concrete examples of
it's
that
our
work.
job to ask you the questions.
And I did actually, it's not in relation to the World Heritage work, but I did include a picture in my slide deck that I forgot to share of. I kind of thought it might be interesting to talk about some of these more novel approaches that we can use to kind of bring people together and create shared vision for marine environments and for you know, sustainability pathways. So this is a cool example of some work around using like interactive games to discuss concepts that relate to rapid change in social ecological systems now and in the future. So this is an example from Tasmania where we've seen really rapid change, both in the marine ecosystem, but also in associated communities on the east coast that's driven by the southward expansion of the or extension of the East Australia current and warming, changing waters. And so in this game, the players take on different roles. You know, they play rock lobsters and urchins, or they play townspeople, or they play like a chef in a sushi restaurant. And it kind of shifts people outside their normal ways of thinking and opens new conversations. So that's been really exciting. And this
what
work
type of groups? Like what type of groups would you play those games with?
Oh, we played it with really diverse groups, and there's probably some of my colleagues on the line who've been involved with this work. I should say I'm so fortunate to work with such amazing people. In the picture I showed, it was a mixed stakeholder group that included, you know, government and fishers and people working in tourism and researchers. It's also been played with university students with thinking about how this kind of tool could be made more accessible to young people, so high school students, for instance. But yeah, targeted at diverse participants. Mm.
You segued me into the next thing. I know that you've been to some schools before. Is this what would you do if you go to schools when you're talking to kids about science? Not playing this game?
Not yet. Not yet. I would like to. I was a colleague the other day was explaining a game that she played with kids in a school to talk about the greenhouse effect, and she demonstrated it as a game of British Bulldogs where the carbon dioxide particles had to get through the barrier, and the more people they put in that barrier, the more difficult it was for the heat and the gases to get out. So anyway, I think we can be creative in some of those things that we do in schools. We used to play a game about Antarctic food webs where the students held a rope in kind of a complex food web configuration, and you could look at the ways that if there was a disturbance to the bottom of the food web where the phytoplankton were, that propagated all the way through krill to whales. That was really powerful. But I guess I've learnt along the way, and including through opportunities for science communication more generally, that it's much more powerful to let an audience ask the questions that interest them rather than to come in and assume that you know what information is going to be relevant and interesting to them. It sounds obvious, but I don't know that we're always taught that way in our kind of early science education. So I'd like to see more of that, allowing audiences to ask their own questions.
So I guess you started with tropical reefs and then you went polar. Feels very different ends of the spectrum to me. But climate change was the one thing linking that. And then when you go into schools, is that one of the topics you bring up as well? I mean, how has climate change been woven into your career as a scientist?
Yeah, it has been a central theme, the impacts of climate change and how we can respond to them. I think, well, I was interested actually because I started working on temperate reefs in Tasmania, so kelp forests, and you know that ecosystem type was one of the early ones that we knew was being impacted by climate change, and then it became very obvious when I worked on coral reefs, seeing the impacts of climate change and how there was this cumulative effect of the climate change impact together with things like pollution and overfishing. So thinking about, you know, how we could build resilience of those environments by managing those other stresses. And then we now know that in terms of, you know, Antarctica, it plays just this absolutely central role in the climate change story. And so I had an opportunity to work as what's called a lead author with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on one of their reports, and they assemble these international teams of people to bring together all of the scientific evidence around what's happening with climate change and its impacts and how we can respond. So I think that was a really important point for me too, in terms of thinking about the urgency of the problem, how we can communicate it, and what the needs are on the ground for people to know what to do, how to plan for the future. And that's where I focus my work now. So
I guess going back to that example of the World Heritage, that's also on climate change as well, like how the type of reports that you'd build up and how you create them and distribute them, if you don't mind a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that was some recent work that's, well, it happened a couple of years ago, but there's been some kind of recent publications that relate to it. So Sarah did some work with the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water to update our scientific understanding and synthesis of the impact that climate change is having on World Heritage in Australia. So there are 20 different World Heritage properties in Australia. They're hugely diverse, you know, from Kakadu and Uluru to the Great Barrier Reef, the Australian convict sites that are spread all across Australia, Budge Bim, which is the most recent listed Australian World Heritage property and is managed by traditional owners. So huge diversity, all dealing with this climate threat. And that work was about how could we co-develop a tool that could be used by the managers of those World Heritage properties to understand the impacts of climate change and then develop plans, adaptation plans for the future. And so it's a toolkit. It's basically just a handbook, but it steps through a process that managers can work through with stakeholders and rights holders to bring the knowledge together and then to develop plans for the future.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Jess, and thank you, Andrea. So that was amazing. Such a lot of experience already in your career, Jess. And I loved hearing about how your family is involved too. My favourite one was the picture of the baby strapped to your child strapped to your chest while you're giving an oration. That is gold. You have to frame that somewhere. Yeah, so thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing them with us today. So we will open up for questions from the audience now. So you can put your question into chat, everybody. Most people are automatically muted and with their camera off. So for us to give you access to unmute, just click the raise hand button, and then I will go to participants and unclick them to allow you to take yourself off mute. And if you're comfortable, do put your camera on while you ask your question, because everyone likes to see who they're talking to. And I'll start now if anyone wants to raise their hand to be the brave person to ask the first question. I think we have Steve. Steve, do you want to ask the first one?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, so thanks, Jess. That was very great to see such an enthusiastic and your family sharing was great. So yeah, my wife went through child rearing, trying to have a science career, and found it, it did impede a lot of the ability to do interaction with, conferences and things like that. So you mentioned that the online environment that came out of COVID was a benefit, but do you think there's a risk though of young scientists, particularly unfortunately early career women, not having that ability to travel? And have you seen any good examples or ideas about how, well, I guess specifically CSIRO could promote that by supporting the funds to take your family with you almost, and things like that?
Yeah, I agree, Steve, that early career stage, there's not really anything that replaces that in-person network building. From my experience, I think CSIRO does quite a good job in identifying that need and enabling opportunities for early career scientists. It does seem to be more common now for conferences to offer childcare, free childcare, so that's a good step. Although I've used it at a couple of conferences myself, and I was the only one, which was interesting. But maybe that was just a kind of a unique thing for me. I don't know that there's a simple solution. I had a really interesting, I've been having ongoing interesting discussions with a colleague around ways that we can make this online environment even more interactive. So there's some really cool, it sounds to me, opportunities for, I guess, creating immersive environments online, so that it's much, much closer to that, what it feels like to be in person, much more possible to have side conversations and build connections with individuals, and basically navigate a virtual space in the way that you would navigate through a conference venue. So I think that's really interesting to see where that will go and what that looks like in terms of making things more inclusive. But yeah, I don't have anything particularly insightful, sorry, beyond things that seem to be already happening, and just being mindful that there is a particular career stage where we should be prioritising opportunities. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Brilliant. We have a hand up from Sean.
And just after that, Michelle, we've just got a question in the chat as well from earlier.
Yep, sure. Sean, I think you might still be muted. No, sorry, we can't. That's okay. If you pop your question in chat, we'll be able to get it that way. Thank you anyway. Sorry about that. We always have
technical issues. Hey,
always have technical issues. Actually, if you can see the questions in chat, do you mind reading them out for us? Ashley is one of our wonderful Sari Staff Association organisers.
Thanks. Yeah, too easy. We just have a question from Savandi. Savandi has asked, Jess, what is your advice to women on how to do brilliant science? And are there any specific areas that generally women and girls can improve upon?
Good question. I mean, if I'm talking to young people, I would generally say, you know, choose an area of science that you're really passionate about, that really, you know, fundamentally interests you. And I'm seeing more and more that particularly at the kind of end of university stage, young people are coming away with much more of a interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary training rather than having necessarily focused in a particular field. So I find that A, just really interesting, and B, something that I think there's probably a strong need for. I don't know that I mean, there are certainly areas of science where it would be great to see greater diversity and more women. An important mentor in my career has made the comment that women can have a particular skill for kind of being able to think about complex systems, particularly ecosystems and social ecological systems. I don't know if that it's probably not evidenced. I think it's something that's come from someone's observation over a long and successful career. But I wonder whether, you know, our brains all work differently, right? And maybe that's the important thing, to connect, understand how you think about the world, and then connect into an area of science that, you know, that capitalizes on that. I don't know if that answers the question.
That was great. We might go back to hands up, but Ashley, I'll call you out whenever we go back to chat. Harriet, did you have a question for us? What, for Jess? And I've just allowed the mic for you, Harriet, and allowed you to put yourself on camera.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? Great. Sorry, technology catching up. Thanks, Jess, for your lovely walk through of all your different experiences. Pretty amazing to hear the diversity of work you've done. I really wanted to pick up on your comments about having an active and engaged partner in helping to raise children while you're trying to both have careers. I also had one of those, and one thing that was really interesting was the barriers that he had to being engaged actively as a parent and taking time out to look after children. Have you had discussions about how, you know, we make this a collective challenge? It is about both parents. It's not about the mother. It's about both parents being able to do that. Have you had any kind of interesting revelations or any discussions that, you know, any ideas that of how we can, you know, do that better institutionally or in other ways across society?
Thanks, Harriet. And another great question. Interestingly, in my husband's case, at the time he was working in a very male-dominated profession, and we decided that I would take the first 6 months, and then he would take 4 months of dedicated time after me, after both children were born. And when he went to ask his employer for that period of parental leave, they'd just never been asked before. And so they kind of went, oh, I guess so. Like, we can't think of any reason why not. So maybe part of it is you know, asking more and giving a clear signal to employers that it's something that people want to be able to do. My understanding from SARA was that as part of the EA, the entitlement for second carer, is that correct, Michelle? So that's a positive example.
I don't want to go into too much detail. Everyone's probably overhearing about bargaining, but do vote. It's that, so parental leave is 18 weeks paid leave for the primary care, and by the end of the next EA, if it gets voted yes, it'll be also 18 weeks paid leave for the secondary, the partner as well. So, you know, finally, you know, 2024, that we're going to see some equality there when it comes to paid parental leave. Hooray. Are we ready to move on to the next question? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt if that's no. Okay.
No.
Ashley, do we want to go to one for chat, and then after that I'll ask Tasman?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a question from Josh Hendry. So Josh is very kindly trying to avoid the feedback in the meeting room that he's in. Jess, if you don't mind me asking, how do you explain climate change to your children and explain what you do in your job?
Thanks, Josh. So my husband is now a science teacher who changed professions, and we have science dinners and he brings his marker pens.
That's cool.
And we have we have 3 blue tongue lizards in a tank on our dining table, and so we draw diagrams on the lizard tank. It's kind of unique.
Is
so I guess
while you're eating your dinner?
Yeah. So maybe what I'm trying to say there is that we just talk about it frequently, and we talk about it from a science perspective of what's happening and what we know. I suspect we will need to start talking more about the emotional and psychological side of that as they get a bit older, and there are some incredible resources available to help support those kinds of conversations. I think Adele actually mentioned Curious Climate Schools in the chat, so that I was involved in the precursor to that, which was a program called Curious Climate Tasmania. But the Curious Climate Schools website just has some incredible resources in terms of talking about climate change with young people. So I'm anticipating that I will increasingly be chatting to, referring to that. Yeah, I don't know. They don't seem very interested in what I do exactly in my job. They know I'm.
They just like coming to the presentations, getting the awards. Yeah. Thanks. Tasman, I believe you're able to unmute now if you have a question for us. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Hey Jess, you're a wonderful communicator, and I am loving the comments and insights, particularly into interdisciplinarity and creativity, because you don't always hear that from scientists. And I'm guessing that you sometimes encounter some challenge in bringing these kind of modes into your work, particularly if it's valuing other knowledge systems other than the Western scientific knowledge systems. And I think similar to Emma, maybe in the chat, I'm wondering whether you've had any mentors or people that, because I don't want to say that it's a female specific ability, but I am very curious as to whether there are others that have influenced you along the way. Yeah.
Thanks, Tamsin. I'm just having a quick look at Emma's question too. Yeah, I think Saro does that work in the inter and transdisciplinary space really well. In general, there's recognition that it takes much longer to do than single discipline science, because it's about building relationships and trust. And there's a lot of sharing amongst the people that are engaged in that space within Saro and beyond about how we can keep learning about how to do that well. And I think so that's the way that the mentoring and kind of, I guess, community of practice works, that we all recognise it's hard to do, it's hard to do well. There are real ethical risks associated with some of the engagement, and we need to learn how to be in that space carefully and respectfully, and understanding what's required in terms of knowledge governance and sovereignty. So I don't know that I'm really answering your question, but I do see a really strong community within Saro and beyond working in that space who will want to support each other to do it well. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah. And any others that have inspired you, I guess?
Many.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if you start naming names, then you automatically forget someone, and then afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Tenzin. Ashley, do we have any more questions from the chat? Otherwise, then next I'll go to Humera.
Yes, we do. We have a question from your colleague in your workplace, Jess, Andress. Andress has asked, is there an age group or groups where we should focus more of our efforts to improve gender equality in science, I guess?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I could answer it. I think I'd maybe have to, I mean, you know, with the leaky pipeline, as it's talked about in science, there is a kind of particular mid-career stage where women tend to leave careers in science, and that is associated with kind of the age at which people might have a family, but there are other factors too. But I think Andreas is kind of asking more, are there, you know, potentially things we can do with younger women and girls to kind of set them up for successful science careers and improved equality. And I think that's also the case, you know, the more that we can engage with young people. And, you know, it breaks my heart when I talk to young people, particularly girls who, you know, they say, oh, they just have this assumption that they will have to make a choice between having a family and being a successful scientist, and that still is, you know, something that young people believe to be true is actually really upsets me. So that maybe it comes back to that visibility piece as well, having young people be able to see that it is possible to you know, to have multiple things in your life and enjoy them and be successful.
Yeah, thanks. We might go to the next hand up, which is Humera. I believe you should be able to take yourself off mute.
Hi, Jess. Thank you. You're definitely an inspiring woman and a beautiful mom and a lovely partner. It's really inspiring listening to you and your journey and the great kids and the great parents you had. I'm really new to CSIRO, just joined 3 weeks ago. So
Welcome.
Thank you. I sort of, the sound was a bit cracking when you talked about World Heritage thing. So coming as an Indigenous person and a scientist and a woman, I can really relate to some of your challenges of life. So coming from the working in a heritage space with the defense, I learned that there is very little research available in underwater heritage for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Have you ever thought or consider that as a talking about heritage, and I'll ask other scientists in this group as well, is there anything that has been done in the past? Because Australia did sign up for the International Underwater Heritage, but the act is only the shipwrecks.
Yes.
But it, yeah.
Yeah.
And the Commonwealth listing of heritage is just terrible, you know. And you mentioned, and I can also relate to that holistic view women often have, and you know, looking at the world and the environment, how we connect the dots. So in terms of that heritage area, um, coming from your experiences, how do you see that heritage space to be is with the underwater heritage especially, you know, and connect that to your holistic views, you know, that leaving the policy on the side because they sucks. You know?
That's right. Yeah.
If you were to vote or participate in any of those World Heritage things, what sort of, from your experience, what sort of approach would you take and how would you go about it? You know?
I might, so there is a separate piece of work that we did that I might send to you, where we looked at approaches to considering heritage and climate change in a much more holistic way. And one aspect of that is this artificial separation between natural and cultural heritage, when from an Indigenous perspective, they're the same thing. So that's a challenge. There is also, there are some relevant examples in terms of underwater heritage. It may be more productive, I think, if you're happy, if I reach out to you and set up a time to chat, and then I could give you some examples and share some of this other work. But I'm really interested in discussing that further, because I agree that it's an area where there's really limited understanding, but also vulnerabilities that relate to climate change and other pressures.
Because
yeah.
a lot of heritage is in the living memories of our people, you know, and the last ice age was only 11,000 years ago. So, you know, they could still be in the living memories of our mob, you know.
Yeah.
I've popped down your details, Mira, and so I'll get you guys in contact with each other after the talk, which is always great. One of the great things that comes out of these type of events.
Thank you,
thank you
Michelle.
very much.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you. And Ashley, do we have any more questions in chat?
Yeah, people have been brilliant at putting questions in here. There is one from Sean, who couldn't get the mic to work. Sean says, have you been following the advancements of OpenAI and ChatGPT? You know, how they're generating content, pictures, video. How do you think that this could potentially be utilised to improve science education, and could it work to attract women into science, maybe?
I would say yes, I have been following it, but not as closely as I would like to, just given, you know, the juggle that we talked about and time constraints. But yeah, I think there are huge opportunities there, but also some kind of complex questions to navigate in terms of the ethics and implications and accessibility. And I know there's lots of great work in SARO in that space. I don't feel up to speed enough to offer any particular examples there, but I'm certainly really interested, and I know that there's a really fascinating series of online seminars happening at the moment in that space where perhaps that question could be discussed from the SARO perspective. So excellent question. Sorry, I don't have a good answer, so I'm not going to try.
All very new, isn't it? So it's all like how will that work in the future? Crystal ball gazing. Yeah. And
it's so interesting to think that it'll be a part of my kid's life. It'll be a key aspect, you know, and it's so kind of fascinating and maybe slightly scary to think about what that will look like.
We have to run to keep up, don't we?
Yeah.
Did anyone else want to ask a question in person before we go back to the chat? We probably have time for one or two more questions before I wrap it up. Okay, Ashley, do we have one or two more in there before we close it all up?
I don't think so, but I wanted to end with a question of my own, if that's okay. I did hear that you had your portrait up in Grand Central Station in New York City. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because that is incredible. That must have been such a a very, very strange moment for you. Yeah, would you share?
Yes, it was a very strange moment when I got an email saying, hey, we want to create a constellation of your portrait. I put an image in. Do you want to see what it looked like? It was a bit weird.
Yeah, yes, we do.
So, there it is. So it was part of, there was a campaign by General Electric in 2017 that was called Balance the Equation. And so they just chose, I think it was maybe 12 female scientists globally, and they created these constellations out of their portraits and projected them on the ceiling of Grand Central Station for a week. And they're like, oh, you can come over and see it if you want. I said, are you paying? They said no. So I didn't see it in person. But they did send me some videos of like people interacting with that, the whole kind of exhibition, and it was really fascinating. I think it was like a cool example of out of the box thinking around how to draw attention to stories of women in science. So I felt incredibly fortunate to be part of it. It is one of those kind of, hey, I had this weird thing happen to me.
Yeah, and how to engage young people as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all demographics, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's fascinating and very, very cool. Sorry, Ashley, I cut you off. Did you have any more to that question, or I think there was one more question that come up in chat, and then I might close this up.
No, that's just amazing, and also so funny that they put you up there and then they wouldn't pay for you to come and see it. But classic. I'll leave my thoughts about that to another conversation with you, maybe over a coffee, Jess. There is a question from Zach, one of our delegates at Clayton. So Zach is about to become a father for a second time, I happen to know, and he has asked, what is one thing in your opinion that, you know, fathers can do to be more supportive of their partner, I guess, like holistically? Speaking from his perspective, and I guess you kind of had some really amazing insights on that, and your relationship with your partner and how you kind of juggle everything as parents. So yeah, thanks, Zach.
That's exciting, Zach. I would hate to be prescriptive about how to be a good dad, and it works differently for everybody. Maybe I'll just flip it a bit and say one thing that I found that I had to do myself was to really actively step back and allow space for my husband to create his own relationship with the children and be a dad in his own way. And it kind of sounds obvious, but it was like that deliberate thing that, well, from the time they're 6 months to a year old, you're the primary carer, and that's your time to do it. How I obviously will, tell you where the nappies are, whatever. But it's time for you. So I think that was important for us, and was something I kind of really actively had to think about doing in a deliberate way. But everybody's so different, and I don't know that, there's so many great dads out there, so many fantastic parents and people doing it in many, many different ways. And I guess it's about us supporting each other in the different ways that we can do it, if that makes sense.
Yep, brilliant. Thank you. I think we've run out of time. I just want to give all of our CSIRO staff a big round of applause for all the questions that we got around this time. And Jess, absolutely inspirational. It's I had a final question for you, which I'm not going to ask because we've had so many great questions, ran out of time. It was, do you ever successfully say no to anything, or do you feel like you just go?
I'm learning.
Yeah. But just big, huge thank you to you for, sharing those pictures and stories about your family and your career. It's very inspirational, especially, when someone young has done so much. It's a question about, does it feel like go, go, go? And also thank you to Andrea, and thank you to Nuwan, and thank you to Ashley and Anthony, who have been helping with the chat, and everyone else that helped out behind the scenes, including those asking questions. If you have any more questions for Jess, or you want any more information about our Women in Science events in the future, or any more information about the CSIRO Staff Association, who is proudly supporting this event, I've popped my contact details into the chat. So if you want to take those down, you can send me an email, and we can set up or talk about anything you have questions on as a follow-up. Just before we leave, Jess, did you have anything you wanted to say as final words? I put you on the spot, didn't tell you this was going to happen.
Not at all, just that it's been really fun, amazing questions, and thank you so much to everybody who joined. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being an excellent speaker, very entertaining. I don't think I've laughed so much in an event before. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a really great day. And of course, Staff Association, we'll see you around in the workplace. But for our next annual event, if you have any ideas or want to be involved, just let us know. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.